Hey, hi, and welcome back. I hope that you are enjoying the testing and troubleshooting process, and I am sure that you are now a lot confident with the hardware design process. Okay, so in previous video, we completed the 7-segment display section, and in this video, I am going to show you the practical demonstration of motor driver section. Okay, and as always, I am going to discuss the testing and troubleshooting technique associated with that particular section. All right. So now let's start with this video. So you already know the learning objective of this video. As always, first of all, I am going to show you the practical demonstration. Okay. So I will show you the practical demonstration of motor driver section. And in this practical demonstration, you already know we are going to discuss the program flow first. And later we are going to program the same code in the controller. And later I will show you the practical demonstration of motor driver section. Okay, and from this we are going to validate whether the motor driver section is working properly or not. Okay, and after that, as always, the next point is testing and troubleshooting. So I will discuss the testing and troubleshooting techniques associated with the motor driver section. Okay, and later the next point is mistakes. So I will discuss all the mistakes that you should avoid while dealing with the motor driver section. So that's how basically we are going to cover this video. Now let's start with this point, which is practical demonstration, and let's see the program flow. So now let's see the flow of code that we are going to program in the controller. So as soon as system is powered, the controller will get switched on. After that, the next point is motor 1 clockwise. So controller is going to send the instruction to the motor driver IC to rotate the motor 1 in clockwise direction. Okay, so it's going to rotate the motor driver IC is going to rotate the motor in clockwise direction. After that, the next point is wait for 2 seconds. So controller is going to wait for 2 seconds, and during that period, this particular motor, which is motor 1, is going to rotate in clockwise direction. Okay, then the next point is motor 1 anti-clockwise. So after 2 seconds, the controller is going to send the instruction to motor driver IC to rotate the motor 1 in anti-clockwise direction. Okay, so the motor 1 will now start rotating in anti-clockwise direction, and again the controller is going to wait for 2 seconds. So till then, this motor 1 is going to rotate in anti-clockwise direction. And after that, the next point is motor 2 clockwise. So controller is going to send the instruction to the motor driver IC to rotate the motor 2 in clockwise direction. Okay, and after that, again it's going to wait for 2 seconds, and during that period, this motor 2 will rotate in clockwise direction. Okay, so for 2 seconds it's going to rotate in clockwise direction. And again, the next point is motor 2 anti-clockwise. So after 2 seconds, the motor 2 will start rotating in anti-clockwise direction, and again in the end, the controller is going to wait for 2 seconds. So this process is actually going to execute in a loop, okay, for infinite amount of time. So that's how basically the flow of code is. Now let's program this code in the controller, and let me show you the practical demonstration. Alright, so now let's program this controller and let's test this motor driver section. Okay, so for that, again I will go to the Arduino IDE, and this is basically the code that we are going to program in the controller. And again, you can explore this particular code. The code is very simple. Okay, so you just go through this code, and after that, now let's program the hardware. So for that, I'm going to click on this button. So I'm just going to hold these motors because they will actually rotate. So they may move from their position. Alright, so we got this error message because we have not connected the programmer to the USB to TTL converter. So I'm just going to connect this programmer, and later after that I will try it one more time. Okay, and let me hold these motors now. Alright, so the controller, you can see, Alright, so I have switched off the power, otherwise these motors will keep making the noise. So we saw that this particular motor 1 first rotated in clockwise direction, and after that it started rotating in anti-clockwise direction, okay, after 2 seconds. And then this particular motor started rotating in clockwise direction for 2 seconds, and later it rotated in anti-clockwise direction for the 2 seconds, okay. And this procedure is actually going to it's going to happen, or it's going to execute in a loop, okay. So this actually tells us that everything is perfectly fine with the motor driver section, and everything is working properly, okay. So now let's talk about the testing and troubleshooting of motor driver section. So in our case, the motor driver section is working perfectly fine without any problem. We also saw that the motors were rotating in proper direction, okay. Both the motors were rotating proper direction. But in case, let's say that if there is a problem with the motor driver section, then the first thing that you have to check is contacts, okay. So you have to check whether these pins which you have connected to these terminals, whether they are, the screws are tight or not. You have to check that, okay. So you have to make sure that there is no loose contact here, okay. And once you verified that there is no loose contact here, then again you can check whether the motors are rotating or not, okay. If still the motors are not rotating, then what you have to do, you have to put your multimeter in continuity mode, okay. You have to put your multimeter in continuity mode, and you have to check the continuity from this point to the point where this wire is connected on the motor, okay. So this will actually ensure that there is a proper contact from this point to the motor point, okay. In the same way you have to do for all the 4 wires, and this will actually give you the surety, at least the contact from this point or from the PCB to the motors are proper, okay. After that, the next point that you have to check is the polarity of the IC, okay. So you have to make sure that when you insert the L293D in the IC base, it's inserted properly. We have already discussed this point when we discussed 7-segment display driver IC. The same thing is valid in case of L293D IC also. So you have to make sure you are inserting the L293D IC in right orientation in the IC base. And same thing is true when you are soldering the IC base on the PCB. You have to make sure that you are soldering the IC base in the right orientation. And we have already discussed what will be the consequences if you solder the IC base in wrong orientation. So that's basically the third. The third point that you have to check, the orientation of IC and also the IC base. After that, once you are sure that the IC is placed properly and also the IC base is soldered properly, orientation is proper, even after that, if still your motor driver section or the motors are not rotating, then you have to check the power pin of this particular IC. So you have to probe the multimeter at this point. You have to connect the positive terminal of the multimeter at this point, and you have to check whether you are getting +5 volt at this point or not, okay. So one terminal of the multimeter will be connected to the ground. You can connect it here, and the positive terminal will be connected here, okay. And you have to check whether you are getting +5 volt at this point or not. And if you are not getting +5 volt, then what you can do, you can press this particular IC. So because sometimes there might be some loose contact between the IC and the IC base, so you have to press the IC and you have to check the voltage again at this point, okay. So this time you will get the voltage at this point. And in case if you are not getting +5 volt at this point, then again you can try to press this IC, because that could be the only reason why you will not get +5 volt at this at this terminal of this IC. So either it could be the problem with the IC base, or the IC will not be pressed properly, or it's not inserted properly, or there is a loose contact between the IC and the IC base. So there are only 2 suspects here. Either you will have to change the IC base, or you have to press the IC properly. And once you resolve these 2 issues, then you will get the +5 volt at this point, okay. So once you are sure that you are getting +5 volt at this point on the VCC1 pin, then you have to check the VCC2 pin, okay. Because if the voltage is not available at this point, then definitely your motors will not work. So you have to make sure that the voltage is available at this point. And again, if the voltage is not available, then you have to press this particular IC, or you will have to change the IC base, okay. So these things should come to your mind when there is no +12 volt at this point, or power supply voltage at this particular point, okay. So once you are sure that you are getting 12 volt here and plus 5 volt is available here, then you have to check the controller side. Okay, you have to check whether the controller is producing the voltages, the control signals on the appropriate pins or not. Okay, so that you will have to check on the controller side. And once you are sure that the controller is actually generating the appropriate voltage on the dedicated pin, then you have to check the same voltage on the pins of this L293D IC here. Okay, so you have to check the voltage on the control pin of the L293D, and even after that still, if the motors are not rotating, it means what? There is a problem with the IC. Okay, so you will have to replace the IC and you will have to insert the IC once again. So if you follow this testing and troubleshooting method in case of L293D IC, definitely you will get the issue and accordingly you can resolve the issue. Okay, so I hope that you got every single thing that we discussed regarding the testing and troubleshooting point of L293D IC. Okay, and one more thing that I want to tell you here is there could be problem with the motors as well. Okay, so it might happen that everything is perfectly fine on the motor driver section, but there might be problem with the motors that we have connected on the terminal blocks. So what you can do, simply you can remove the motors from the terminal block and individually you have to check the motor. You can directly connect these two terminals to the plus 12 volt, or you can connect directly these two terminals to your power supply. In the same way you have to do it for second motor. So once you are sure both the motors are working perfectly fine, then there might be problem with the connectors or these terminal blocks. So you have to make sure that the terminal blocks are properly soldered from the bottom side or not. Okay, so that could be the reason why your motors will not rotate. Okay, so if everything is fine with the IC, then definitely motors will rotate. Otherwise you will have to check the motors individually, or you have to check these terminal blocks whether they are soldered properly or not. Okay, and always you can check the voltage across the terminal blocks. You can verify if the motor is not rotating, then you can actually check the voltage across these 2 points. You can connect positive terminal here, you can connect negative terminal here of multimeter, and you can check whether you are getting plus 12 volt here or not. Okay, so I will show you that now. So let me just remove these all wires. Alright, so we have disconnected the motors and let me power our system. So the system is now powered, and let me make the space for the multimeter. Alright, so now let me put the multimeter in voltage mode. So I'm going to set the knob at this point, and now that we have powered our system, so let's check whether we are getting 12 volt here or not. So you can see on the multimeter we have 0 volt right now. So you will get the 12 volt in a moment, which is basically the power that voltage that we have provided to VCC2 pin of the L293D IC. Okay, so this actually ensures that everything is perfectly fine with the channel 1 or the connector 1. Initially we are getting plus 12 volt, and later you can see the polarity is changing minus 12 volt. In the same way you have to do it for second terminal. So right now you can see we are actually getting 11.95 or plus 12 volt, and later you are getting the negative or minus 12 volt. Okay, so this is how basically you can verify whether L293D section is working properly or not. Okay, so that was all about the testing and troubleshooting of L293D section. Now let's talk about the mistakes that you should avoid when you deal with the L293D section. So most of the mistakes we have already discussed. Okay, but still let me point out those mistakes. Okay, so the first mistake that you can do is it's related to the IC base. Okay, so when you solder the IC base on the PCB, you have to make sure that the polarity of the IC base is proper. The notch should be, you have to match the notch of the IC base with the notch which is present on the cell screen. In the same way, you have to check the polarity of IC when you place the IC or when you press the IC on the IC base. So that's basically the first mistake that you should avoid when you deal with the L293D section. Okay. After that, the second mistake that you can do is related to the motors. Before you connect the motors on these terminal blocks, you have to individually check the motors whether they are working properly or not, because unnecessarily you will waste your time here, right? the motors are not working, your L293D section is working properly. So you have, in order to avoid such kind of situation, you can, first check the motors whether they are working properly or not, and later you can connect the motors to these terminal blocks. Okay. After that, the third point is actually very important, and this mistake I didn't share with you in case of, when we discuss the 7-segment display section. So this mistake is valid for this section and also for this section. Whenever you will use the through-hole IC, you have to make sure that always use the IC base for that particular IC. Okay. For example, let's say that if there is a problem with the IC, and if you solder this IC directly on the PCB, then you can't. You are going to face lot of problems. You are going to face lot of pain. Okay. So in order to avoid that kind of situation, you can always use a IC base. And if there is a problem with the IC, then straight away you can remove the IC, with the help of the probe of the multimeter or by using the tweezer. Okay. So that's basically the point that I wanted to emphasize on. Always remember, you have to use the IC base, and on the IC base only you have to place the IC. Okay. Don't solder the IC directly on the PCB. Okay. So because if there is a problem, then you're going to face lot of issues in future related to removing the IC from the PCB. Okay. So that was all about the mistakes. I hope that every single thing that we discussed in this video is now clear to you. First of all, I showed you the practical demonstration. Then we discussed the testing and troubleshooting part related to this section. And after that, I shared the mistakes with you. Okay. So I hope that every single thing that we discussed is now clear to you. And if you still have any kind of doubt related to this particular section, then definitely you can reach to me and I will help you with that. Okay. So now I will see you in the next video, which is about DC motor speed control using computer. Okay. So I will see you in the next video now.